volunteers to make everything work. I have co-president Jim Hammond over here. Helen Wilson, who was here a minute ago, but she is co-vice president. Betty Conley, who is co-vice president. Evelyn Young, who's our treasurer. Jean Binstock, one of the board members. Toby Chapman, back in the back there. Toby Chapman, you see him. Audrey Glickman, of course, our camera person, also board member. We have membership coordinator Stanley Klein and email coordinator Tony Indovino. For about 10 years, the organization is headed by Michael Ehrman, who recently stepped on to move to New Jersey, be close to his son and his grandkids. Evelyn Young is going to speak a few words about how we're going to recognize him, if she wants to come up.
Thanks, Wayne. Hi. Some of you already have the announcement on your chair. I'm happy to let you know that the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition is honoring Michael for his years of services to the community and for his development of our organization to what it is now. So it will be on October 30th. It will be at the Shinley Golf place, and there'll be and so if you're interested in going, look at the back and send the money in, and make sure you indicate that it is for Michael Ehrman, because we already have one table already filled for Michael. There's a table of 10, and if you do, then we'll try to put together everybody who is here that's going to be at the dinner for Michael. Okay, so you have that announcement. The second announcement I have is the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition is also going to have their annual community membership meeting on September the 17th on Tuesday. Help me with the time, Maria.
Sorry, it's Tuesday the 17th, and it's from 6:30.
6:30 to like 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it's at the JCC. So, right.
Yeah.
So feel free to come to that. And I just want to mention that Maria, who is Cohen, is our new ED for the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition. So stand up, Maria. So if you have any questions about the dinner for Michael, or if you want to take out an ad for Michael in the brochure that we'll have for the dinner, the information's here, and you can also ask her about it afterwards. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Just a quick hands up. How many people were here from Hazelwood? Okay. I wasn't sure how it was going to go.
We have a couple Greenfields here.
Oh, Greenfield, but you're from Greenfield. I want to mention some upcoming events, future meetings. The October meeting, the date has been changed from the 8th to the 15th due with the conflict with the start of Yom Kippur. It is now scheduled for October 15th, and the title will be Prohibition Pittsburgh. It's going to be presented by a longtime journalist and author, Richard Gazarek. The November meeting then will highlight the contents of the City of Pittsburgh archives, which are pretty extensive, and that will be presented by the city's archivist, Nick Hartley. And then December's meeting, it'll be presented by member Barbara Burston, and the title speaks for itself, The Irrepressible Sophie Masloff. Our speaker for tonight is JaQuay Carter. He is founding president of the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society. They have over 1,000 members in their Facebook page. And there's always been a kind of relationship between Squirrel Hill and, from early on, and Squirrel Hill and Hazelwood being located on the same hill. Some interesting things going on down in Hazelwood. There's an old stone house that's being remodeled, belonged to John Woods, who's a politician. It was called the Hazel Hill Estate, built in 1784. It's now being refurbished and should be finished before too long. I'm gonna have to kill some time, maybe. Oh, okay. Okay, and my family originally came to Hazelwood when they moved into the Pittsburgh area. My grandfather moved there in 1878, I think it was. And I was going through some old papers at home, and I came up with some things I'm going to donate to the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society. May be of interest to people. It's the Johnston Avenue Baptist Church booklet. It's 1853, I believe. Fort Black Post of the American Legion. It's one of their publications. There's a 1937 book about the Hazelwood School, and it's got some really interesting tidbits in it. I know if you remember in our last newsletter, Helen had extracted some funny things that were in there. It's worth looking at if you haven't seen it. And then from the some order papers from the Monongahela Connecting Railroad Company, which of course went between the mill and the other side of the river. And at any rate, I'm going to put this in a table here, and Juan can take it when he leaves, but if you want to look at it beforehand, you're free to do that.
Hazelwood always, Pittsburgh, city of Pittsburgh.
Do you want to get, I'll finish my introduction here. And this is JaQuay Carter. He's founding president of the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society. And without further ado.
Thank you all so much for having me. I did have a little bit of technical difficulty with my projector slide, so I will not have any pictures, unfortunately, which won't be as interesting, but I'll still do my best to fill you in vividly with all the information we have here. And again, my name is JaQuay Mccarter. I was actually born in the Greater Hazelwood community ever since 1983. Getting older here, I'll be celebrating my 36th birthday on Friday, actually, Friday the 13th. So, thank you. I just remembered that as I was talking. But my mother's family had actually lived in the area for 4 generations. First migrating from South Carolina, then to Braddock by 1930, working at the Edgar Thompson Steelworks there, and then finally settling on Dixon Street in Munhall. My great-grandfather was a part of the Great Migration of African Americans from the South. Many of them ended up here. Tens of thousands of blacks migrated from the South to find better jobs in the North, most of them being in the steel mill industry. I had actually a great-grandfather, a grandfather, and another great-grandfather actually on my mother's side who worked in the mill. My great-grandfather, John Whitehouse Robinson, he actually died working as a janitor in the steel mill in 1955 in Homestead Steelworks. So I do have a lot of background in my family with the steel industry, which definitely was something that brought me into researching and looking into how Hazelwood came to be. But the history there in Hazelwood had virtually been lost. There really had only been one account of the history in 1925 done, which definitely left out a lot of things that had happened since. So I was really curious to find out what had happened here in Hazelwood. Even growing up there, I really didn't hear many stories about any notable people or things that had happened there. So I was very curious and began to look into records and census reports and all the pictures that were available to kind of find out what had happened here. I'd heard many stories about how the community was thriving with 2 movie theaters and grocery stores and gas stations. But when I grew up in the 1980s, all of that had disappeared. So I would hear those stories but say, well, where is all that stuff? So it was so great to find and talk with older generations and get pictures and get kind of caught up to what had been happening there. The community is now known as Hazelwood. Glenwood and Glen Hazel were once heavily wooded glens of hazelnut trees, which is where Hazelwood got its name from. Hazelwood and Glenwood have a long and legendary recorded history, even though it is virtually unknown within the city. Hazelwood is the largest and most well-known of the 3 sister neighborhoods that are Hazelwood, Glenwood, and Glen Hazel. But most people don't know what happened there. The history of Glenwood is slowly fading into memory, being best known for the bridge that bears its name. But the community, the businesses, the churches, the schools, all of that has basically disappeared. And most people actually refer to what was in the past, the boundaries between Hazelwood and Glenwood were very fierce. So if you lived on the side of Glenwood, you know, you were proud of Glenwood and vice versa. But now Glenwood is just fading from memory. Most people just refer to the whole area as Hazelwood. So some of my work has been to keep Glenwood, the memory of Glenwood alive. A lot has happened there. So just looking into some of the things, the Goomar Bridge was actually the first bridge built in 1897 to carry streetcars in Allegheny County. So that was something I found out about Glenwood. Also, in Glenwood, there was a large Jewish community that began there in the around 1918. I actually had a slide with the minute books, but I will have to show you that at another time, I promise. So they actually had a plaque on the church that read Anshe, and I hope I'm not pronouncing this incorrectly, the A-N-S-E-H-E, and it means people of, and there was actually a sign on the church that said Anshe, meaning people of Glenwood and Hazelwood. So when I did talk with Eric Legge, who is with the Heinz History Center, Jewish Archives, he did tell me that that word Anshe, meaning people of, was usually used for the place of origin, like Romania, Lithuania, Germany. But for them to actually say that they were people of Glenwood and Hazelwood, it meant that they really loved the community. And they provided businesses and haberdasheries, butcheries, pharmacists, all in Glenwood and Hazelwood. There was actually a synagogue there in Hazelwood for a long time. It was built in 1927. It no longer stands, and it actually was torn down within the last decade. But I had actually visited that place of worship when it had changed hands, and it was an African-American congregation. And I never knew there was actually a cornerstone there that read the name of Schwartz. But I never knew any of the history when I had gone into that building. So I thought that was really interesting that there was Jewish congregation there. There still is a building, a couple buildings on the main road of 2nd Avenue that bear the name Schwartz, because he was, a very prominent businessman there in Glenwood, and owned businesses. He actually owned a beer distributor, and then later moved to Homestead. And then the Jewish community by the 1950s in Hazelwood had dwindled down to, I think, about 12 members. And then that church was actually sold, and those members did move on to Squirrel Hill, actually, Greenfield, and then Squirrel Hill. But before anyone had actually settled in Hazelwood, there would have been the Native Americans living there, which was very interesting to find that we had a burial mound that was highly publicized in 1898 and excavated by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, where they found arrowheads and skeletal remains in this mound. So those people would have been considered the Monongahela people. They would have been a woodland manifestation from the year 1050 up until 1635 in western Pennsylvania, Maryland, eastern Ohio, and West Virginia. But these people, the Native Americans, would have been also a part of the Adena people who built ancient burial mounds. I actually had a picture of the mound, but I will have to make sure I can get that to you.
We're imagining it.
Oh, that's great. Just please use your imagination.
Is it still there?
The mound was destroyed. Local people went there fascinated by what they saw and raided everything out of the mounds. And actually, the area was developed on shortly after, which is kind of sad. There's actually a place called Redstone Alley, which runs right where this mound would have been, and I'm hoping to get some sort of marker or something to be placed there because it definitely happened there. Well, these people, I did find out, the Native Americans were hunter-gatherers, and they traveled every few years as the resources depleted. So they would have lived here, but then after all the game was depleted and all the resources, then they just went eastward and westward looking for new gathering places. But in 1768, that was when the first settlers would have come to the area, which would have been of Scottish descent. There was a Sandwich Treaty with the Native Americans where the land was bartered. That would eventually be known as Greenfield, Hazelwood, and Glenwood. Among the first settlers was John Woods. He was actually the son of Colonel George Woods, who was Pittsburgh's first surveyor. The father and son had actually laid out the city of Pittsburgh together, and Wood Street downtown is named for them. John Woods lived from 1761 until 1816. He was a political leader, a Federalist, and a member of the prominent Pittsburgh family, the Woods. They laid out the city of Pittsburgh in 1784, and John did the actual drafting, and the plan is referred to as the John Woods Plan of Pittsburgh. John was actually elected into the Pennsylvania Senate in 1797 and was elected as a representative to the 14th United States Congress, holding office from 1815 to 1817 when he passed away. So he built this house in 1792, the John Woods House, where he actually never lived. It was actually intended for the caretaker of the farm, which was the Scotch Bottom Farms. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Scotch Bottom. It actually was the name that John Woods had given to the property. It included 313 acres, and then also there was another plot for 164 acres. So it actually was the entire Hazelwood and Glenwood as we know it today, which is what he owned. And that whole land at one time was called Scotch Bottoms. When he died, he did leave the property to his remaining siblings. And when the last sibling died, who was Mary, or they called her Polly, the property was inherited by her, by his and her two nephews, who was Harry Woods and John George Woods. John George Woods, who was the nephew of John Woods, had actually built the Hazel Hill Estate around 1859. And later, the Hazel Hill Estate, by taking Hazel from Hazel Hill and Wood from the Wood family, the area became known as Hazel Woods. And it also was a part of Peoples Township, which was a large land acreage that ran from the Monongahela River in Hazelwood to Lawrenceville at the Allegheny River. So even though Hazelwood was a part of Peoples Township, it was known locally as Hazel Woods. At this house, the John Woods house, which has been in the news recently because it's going to be turned into a Scottish pub. Which is pretty nice. So it is honoring the history of the neighborhood, being that it was known for its Scotch bottoms, and also the Woods family. They were the founding, family of Hazelwood and Glenwood. At this house in 1849, Stephen Foster, the famous composer, would have visited this home where there was a beautiful piano that was purchased. Not a lot of people owned pianos. I mean, you had to have a lot of money at that time. So I believe that in Hazelwood, there were only 2 pianos from the research that I found. One was owned by the Woods family and another by George K. Flowers, or George K. Flower, I'm sorry, there's no S on the end. There were 2 families, one was Flowers and one was Flower. And there's a Flowers Avenue, which is named after the Flowers family, but Flower, there's a George K. Road up off of Hazelwood Avenue on the border of Greenfield, which is named after him. And also an Amelia Street, which is named after his wife, which was pretty cool. But out of the 2 pianos, the one that Stephen Foster used the most was the one at the Woods home. He actually was friends with George K. Flower, who was a music teacher as well. So he did play at that piano, but he actually wrote Where Is Thy Spirit, Mary, which was dedicated to Mrs. Harry Wood's sister after she died. And then he also wrote Gently to Mine Heart Appealing, which was dedicated to Mrs. Harry Woods, who was a lifelong friend of his from Lawrenceville. He also wrote Jenny with the Light Brown Hair, which was written for his wife at this piano, reportedly. And also, one of my favorite tunes of his is Nellie Bly, which was written also at this piano. And it was written with the house servant in mind, who actually lived in the home with the Woods family. She reportedly heard him playing at the piano and poked her head out to ask who was playing the piano, and they said that it was, well, she poked her head out, and Stephen Foster asked who she was, and the hostess, Mrs. Woods, replied, "That's Nellie Bly." And soon after, he began to compose Nellie Bly, which is so cool. I love that song. But I was researching the Woods family because I wanted to know who lived in that house. Because when you look up things, it's all kind of different things on Google, which is not correct, and I'm hoping to change that actually. Actually on Wikipedia it's not correct. So I'm hoping to go in and add the actual research information that I found. But I was researching the Woods family in 1860, and in the Peoples Township, which it was called then, a few years before it actually became officially Hazelwood. In 1860, I researched the family and I found Harry Woods living there, his wife, his sister-in-law, their children, and the mother and father-in-law of Mr. Harry Woods. And also there was a 70-year-old black woman named Nellie Brown who lived in the home. And she was the only black person on the census report at all. So when I saw that she was Nellie and she lived in the house, I said, oh, there really was a Nellie Bly, I can't believe that. Which was a part of my research. I was just like so excited when I found that. It just lasted for like a couple weeks. I was like, oh my God, there really was a Nellie. Nellie Bly would go on to inspire there was a Nellie Bly who became a writer and is very well known. There was a movie done about Nellie Bly, who was actually from around Pittsburgh as well. But she took her name from that song of Stephen Foster's, which was pretty cool. So now we're in the 1860s, where Mr. Harry Woods is sworn in as the Allegheny County Sheriff in 1861. During the Civil War, he actually served as Allegheny County Sheriff, which was pretty nice. He died in 1863, which wasn't so nice, so he only was sheriff for 2 years. But his family continued to occupy the home until 1885. The first track of railroad was actually built by Mr. B.F. Jones of the Pittsburgh and Connersville Railroad, and later of Jones and Laughlin Steel Corp. Unlike most lines, the railroad was built inland as to respect the residents' concern over maintaining the river's aesthetic value. This railroad later separated Hazelwood into 2 sections, coining the local term below the tracks, which is where most of the immigrant population lived, close to the mill where they worked. So it's pretty nice, no commute or anything, don't have to worry about gas or anything, you can just walk to work, and then back home for lunch, and then back to work. But by 1869, Hazelwood actually was officially incorporated into the city of Pittsburgh after Peebles Township dissolved on June 30th of 1868. Hazelwood was known then for the railroad. It ended up spurring the iron and steel industries of Jones and Laughlin. There was railroading, boat building, there was tanning being done, butchering, the river trade. We actually had one of the riverboat captains was the first to steer a boat from Pittsburgh to Green Bay, Wisconsin. So that was something that we can have a claim to fame about. We did have a lot of riverboat captains. On one census record I found, I think from the 1880s, one riverboat captain had an income, his estate was worth $100,000, and that was in 1880, and today that would be like close to about 500,000. So I was like, wow, these people did have a lot of wealth in Hazelwood. There were a lot of mansions. Senator Oliver Mansion, which is still there. It's actually the first Hungarian Lutheran church was built onto it, and right now it is a community organization called Center of Life. So there are a lot of examples of the wealth that once was there, but over time, a lot of those things haven't been taken care of as much as they should be, which is one of the things that I'm working to address. Later on in Hazelwood's history, we did have one of the original Carnegie Libraries built in 1899. It was one of 5 of the first original libraries to be built in the city, which is pretty cool as well. That building right now is not being occupied. It has been sitting vacant for 14 years, and I'm working now with the community, a veterans group, the URA, to try to bring that building back and have it for the headquarters of the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society. Just something I throw out there. So I actually have some meetings coming up about that, and I'm really excited and hoping to come back and talk to you guys about that. Now, did you guys know that bingo was invented in Hazelwood? Can you believe that? I didn't believe it either. I had to research it to make sure.
Why?
But I would have had a picture that would have showed in terms of Mr. Hugh J. Ward. He lived in Hazelwood up until he died. He moved there around 1918. And in the 1920s, in the early 1920s, around 1923, he actually began running this carnival game in Western Pennsylvania. It was originally a Canadian game that he saw while he was visiting there, popular with soldiers, called Howsy Howsy. Not as catchy as bingo, but yeah. Ward thought it was easier to shout bingo. He said we couldn't call it Howsy Howsy, we needed a 5-letter word, one for each column. Makes sense. Bingo was a popular phrase in those days, and so we adopted that. Ward was actually granted a copyright privilege to operate the game on a commercial scale in connection with merchandise, promotions, and advertising in 1933. So that was pretty cool. That's a pretty big claim to fame for Hazelwood. The house where he died in is actually owned by one of the members of the society, and we plan to have a historic marker placed out in front of there. We're actually I'm raising money for this project while working with the Propel Hazelwood Charter School. I do have an after-school program called the History Makers Club, where I talk to them about local history, and I do use the game of bingo as an educational tool in all its different forms today. There's so many different, I mean, there's like St. Patrick's Day bingo, there's every kind of bingo you can think of, and all started in Hazelwood. Also in Hazelwood, on October 7, 1954, there was a tragic accident involving 15-year-old John Menadeo. And also there was a young black girl that was killed, 14-year-old Ella Cornelius of Glen Hazel. There were actually 5 other people injured. One was actually had a skull fracture, and she took about 5 years to come back, and she actually lived a full life. I believe that she is still alive. And there were 4 other students that were hurt, and they all survived as well. But John and Ella did not. There was a school being built called the New Roosevelt School. The old Roosevelt School would have been where the Greenfield Giant Eagle is today. When they were building the new one in 1958, they did name it after John Menadeo. Instead of calling it the New Roosevelt School, they named it after him, which is so great. I've actually talked with the family a bit because there was a plaque that used to sit on the building right where the accident happened in Hazelwood that the family still has, and they wanted to donate it to the Heinz History Center, but the Heinz History Center doesn't accept plaques of that kind. So they put me in touch with them to see if we could, put it back in Hazelwood. Maybe in the old library that we're working on, or once they rebuild the new buildings on 2nd Avenue, maybe it can go like where it used to be on the corner there. And there's also been talk with John Menadeo. The principal there has invited me there to talk more about John Menadeo. Last week I actually went to Calvary Cemetery, where he is buried, and paid my respects for the first time. Since I've been researching him and sort of honoring him, it was really nice to actually go to his grave. It's very nice. Hugh Ward, the inventor of bingo, is actually buried in Calvary Cemetery as well. So I went to see him and his family, which was very nice. And I just thanked him for his awesome invention and helping me win some money the other week. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, let me see here. There was Fort Black that came up here in this American Legion post. We actually have ours in Hazelwood, named after Fort Black. I'm a veteran myself of the Marine Corps, not as cool as these veterans would be back in the Civil War, but it really meant a lot to me to look into Fort Black as it being one of the only fortifications built in Pittsburgh for the Civil War. It was never completed because after the Gettysburg battle, it was basically, there were no more battles like north, like close to Pittsburgh or anything. So that actually never was finished or never was even used in battle, but it was a play area for many people of that generation. They would just play around there and hang out around there. I would have had a map to show you exactly where that would have been, but it would have been near Amelia Street and Bigelow Streets on the Hazelwood-Greenfield border, right off of Bigelow Street. There was, I talked a little bit about Glenwood, but I wanted to say that the name Glenwood, the wood obviously comes from the Wood family, just as Hazelwood does, but the Glen was actually named after an actual glen or stream that ran close to the property. But those men were very influential that started that hotel. They started the Glen Hotel, which also led to the Braddocksville Plank Road, which is known as 2nd Avenue today. That road started at Grant Street downtown, and it was an old Indian path that ran through Hazelwood. It wasn't completed all the way to Glenwood at one time, and these men got together with their influence and money and power to have that road brought all the way through to Glenwood. And it actually did continue on through Duck Hollow and Braddock, and its terminus was in Turtle Creek, which I had no idea about. And I think that you can still see remnants of the road under the Goomar Bridge, but it doesn't continue anymore. I tried to go there with my bike when I was a kid, and you can't get through all the way. But I thought that was pretty cool. That's why the name was Braddocksville Plank Road, because it led all the way to Braddock and beyond. That was pretty neat about Hazelwood. Some of the cool things going on right now in Hazelwood is the preservation of some of these older buildings that I was talking about, such as the John Woods House, the historic Carnegie Library there, Gladstone School, Bergwin School had actually been closed for years, and now it is the Pro Hazelwood. So it's very nice to see a lot of the institutions that did survive the sort of depression that Hazelwood went under, to be brought back to life. And I'm so happy to be a part of those things. Working down on Hazelwood Green at Mill 19, there was a lot going on there. We're actually having a meeting on Monday about unveiling our new master plan that we've been working on in the neighborhood. It's actually been like, oh boy, this particular incarnation has been about 2 years in the making, but for years and years, I mean, even going back to the 60s, there's been urban renewal efforts and community efforts to address a lot of the problems, such as getting a new Glenwood Bridge, because that old bridge had holes all in it, and the community came together to protest and get a new bridge built. So those sort of things have been going on for quite some time. I was able to grow up at a time when I saw a lot of leaders in the community, even through the economic depression, they still stuck it out and saw that in the future it would finally come. And I mean, this is a long time coming. Even before I was born, this sort of envisioning of a better Hazelwood, a better Glen Hazel. I didn't really talk much about Glen Hazel, but I was actually born in Glen Hazel, as I mentioned earlier, and then my family had lived there since 1942, when they were moved from Dixon Street and Homestead over to Glen Hazel, which that whole Glen Hazel community, 999 houses, was built for the Carnegie, Illinois steelworkers who were displaced when World War II hit, and they needed that land to, expand the mill and start cranking out tanks and all kind of war things. So my great-grandfather moved across to Glen Hazel. It was one of the first families to live there. At that time, it was a very intermixed community. There was a grocery store there. It was one of the only housing projects to include a grocery store, which was called Carp's. My aunt actually worked there in the ice cream parlor that they had in there. And when I hear people talk about it, they only say good things, how clean it was, how nice it was, how everyone got along together. And now it is actually one of Pittsburgh's 90 neighborhoods, Glen Hazel, but most people don't know what it is. Sometimes I say, well, I was born in Glen Hazel, and they're like, where is that? And I say, oh, it's near Hazel, and they say, oh, okay, I know about Hazel, but I don't know about Glen Hazel. But Glen Hazel is a place that has a lot of history as well. Being that it was for the mill workers, it was actually one of the first of its kind to be built. It was the largest as well, and it was a housing project. Around the 70s, it's really started to decline, and a lot of the homes were torn down. A lot of people moved away, but they still have a reunion every year. It was just this past Labor Day, You know, and everybody still gets together. So many memories there, even when I was growing up. The place where I grew up is actually all torn down now. It did have a picture of how it used to look, but it was such a great place. It was very safe. You know, there was activities for us to do. We stayed out of trouble. You know, I was able to grow up at a time when we still played hide and seek, and you know, we kind of didn't get into any trouble. But then the neighborhood did take a really dark turn, and a lot of friends and family ended up being killed, and there were drugs and all kind of things that I witnessed growing up. But my mom raised me in the church. I was in Hazelwood Presbyterian Church ever since I was a kid. That church actually dates back to 1869 when Hazelwood was first founded. And it's no longer, the building is still there, but the congregation has dwindled. Along with a lot of the other churches, there were at one time 3 Hungarian churches, and now there's only one, which Hazelwood was known as a Hungarian place. There was all kind of Hungarian culture there. Even now there is still one place that you can go, Jojo's Corner, that serves Hungarian food. I was there last summer eating, and I had goulash and all kinds of Transylvanian things. It was so good. But yeah, I mean, to lose a lot of the culture that was there has been pretty sad. A lot of the clubs and the Irish clubs and the Slovak clubs, everything you could think of, it just kind of faded away. People moved away when things started going bad. My family even moved away. We moved from Hazelwood to Homestead, not too far away, but my parents, wanted me to have something better than they had, which was great. But I'm back in Hazelwood now as an adult, because I can make my own decision. I was only like a kid then. So we're going to move out of here. I'm like, oh, please don't. I love it here. But I didn't know what all the things that were going on, and it ended up being for the best. But so happy to be back now to kind of restore pride in the neighborhood, remembering those things that once were there, the bonds, the culture, all those things have actually brought pride back to the community, which I really wasn't expecting to do. I just was wanting to put out a few things about my family and some of the names that make Hazelwood what it is, like Bergwin, Blair, Lytle, Johnston. Those were real names. They have streets and schools and things named after them now, but those people actually did live there. So it was so cool to go back in time and find them in some way, find pictures of them. Every time I find something new, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I know what John Woods looks like now. Like it's just things that you can't find in a book anywhere, or even on the internet. It's really tough because so many things are not accurate. So looking into this and researching and actually finding everything has been so cool and rewarding. Actually won an award from the Young Preservationist Association because of my work, featured on the front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette last year. I threw a 150th anniversary for Hazelwood's founding, which no one even knew when Hazelwood was founded, including myself. We don't have a sign that says, "Welcome to Historic Hazelwood." I'm working to get that too, because we do have history there. It's not just about the economic decline and the violence or anything that you hear about in the media. I mean, there actually are positive things going on there, and people have come out of there, even through those dark times, who are doing really wonderful things. So I'm just happy to share some of that stuff with you. I don't know where I'm at with time, but I don't know if anyone has any questions or... Yes, sir.
How does the industry develop in Hazelwood?
The industry, like the J&L Steelworks, or well, in 1861, after it had been started on the south side, they did come over and build the Eliza blast furnaces, and beehive coke ovens, which, you know, basically stretched from Hazelwood Avenue all the way down actually to Bates Street at one time. So that's where the Eliza furnaces would have been. And basically, they were second behind, you know, Carnegie Steelworks. They were pretty big. You know, they actually provided, you know, materials for the war as well. They weren't necessarily a steel company. You know, they provided resources for steel to be made, you know, such as coke and iron. But there was also, like I said, shipbuilding, railroads. You know, I mean, this is how people made a living. You know, and then when all of that disappeared, it just took everything with it. Basically, you know, all the businesses, all the culture, you know, sort of went away with that industry, which is like, you know, happened to most of the other communities as well, you know, that had that same type of industry, but it really, you know, decimated Hazelwood. And it's just so funny that there's all this effort for, you know, it to come back. Even down where the mill was at, they're realigning the streets back to how they were. It's the first time you can get down to that mill site in 150 years, you know, just to be able to say, wow, this is where all this happened. You know, all these immigrants came, you know, to work and, you know, kind of put Hazelwood on the map as far as that. Like, it really was. And then it was the last remaining steel mill in Pittsburgh. So that's pretty cool. Outside of Braddock.
You may have just answered my question. So I'm driving down Hazelwood Avenue.
Yes.
And you hit 2nd Avenue, and all of a sudden you can go
You can go straight.
You can go straight.
I know. I was like that the same way, you know.
What would I see if I were to go straight?
If you go straight, you would actually see the Uber test track on the left. Which is still there for, I think, about another year or some months now. It's actually narrowing down. They were there for 4 years. I think they had a contract for it. Oh, I'm sorry. I had turned the mic off. So you would see the Uber test track on the left, which is still used for their autonomous self-driving vehicles. Then on the right-hand side, you would see the Mill 19 complex, which is almost, its first phase is almost finished. They're actually going to have a food truck area and place for concerts and everything, an outside plaza that you'll be able to, you know, go up to. There's bike lanes being put in. The original Blair Street and Lytle Street were cut off at Tecumseh when the mill expanded, but now they're going to be laid back out. And if you actually drive down 2nd Avenue from town, you can turn in on Blair Street. You know, it takes you around, and then you can end up on Hazelwood Avenue. So people are biking there and, you know, getting close to the river as they could, you know, in that area, because it's just been closed down for so many years. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. What are the property values like over there? And then after that, I want to know where that restaurant is.
The restaurant is actually right where he was saying, right at the bottom of Hazelwood Avenue at 2nd. You'll see it on your left, you know, diagonal there. It's a Hungarian restaurant. You can't miss it.
Is it open like for lunch?
It's not
No.
open all the time. He usually takes reservations. You may have to call to see if he's open.
And
He
what's
doesn't.
the name?
His name is Alex Bodner,
Okay.
and it's Zsorzsa's Corner Hungarian restaurant.
How do you spell it?
What's it called?
It is spelled J-O-Z-S-A, I think,
It's SC.
or S-C-C-A. If you, I don't know, I wish I could look it up for you. Yeah, I know.
I'll look it up then.
Yeah, Hungarian restaurant, Hazelwood. I
So
don't
it's
think
like a
there's.
hit or miss, but you should call first.
It's a hit or miss, you know. One time I was there, I just happened to go and he was outside and he had some food and he let us come in. You know, it's wonderful. But he likes large groups, you know, so like if you've got a bunch of people, food is amazing. And as far as property values, Hazelwood is you know, concerned about gentrification because of the it all started with the Amazon that was scheduled to go in. I mean, it was in the runnings to be a choice for Amazon down on the Hazelwood Green, and it was going to bring all these jobs and do all these things. But it actually, they passed on us, of course. But it sort of was a good thing because we are trying to slowly develop, and not be in this sort of thing that happened maybe with the waterfront or things where, we want to have a say in what happens there. So we are having meetings, and every time you turn around, there's a meeting every week, to talk about this or talk about that, and trying to keep that from happening, keep the property values from going up. There's the local community development center, Hazelwood Initiative, who is buying homes in order to keep them at a certain price for renters and first-time home buyers. My cousin actually went through that program and bought a home last year, and it's been working out pretty good as far as that. But there have been some outside speculators coming in purchasing things that Hazelwood Initiative can't stop. So some of those rents have gone up, but there is an effort at least being done to push back against it, to slow it from happening at least,
Is that part of Pittsburgh as far as the police force and everything?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's City of Pittsburgh.
It's not like Squirrel has its own.
No, we are, we're zone 3, I think. Am I right about that? The same zone that Squirrel would have, I believe. Is that, well, Corey O'Connor, yeah, is in our same district, but as far as the police, I believe we have the same, is it 4? That's on 4. That's right here in Squirrel Hill near the Tree of Life. Yes. So we're trying to, stop prices from just skyrocketing, and it has been working so far.
So what's the average house?
You mean, well, a house just sold that I toured, and it was 70,000, and that was below the tracks. It was close to where the mill would have been, and now it's going to be in a very good neighborhood. Once all the businesses start coming on the Hazelwood Green, they'll be able to just walk to them as if they were working at the mill still. So not too bad, not going up drastically, but something we're keeping an eye on too. That's all. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
When did woods become wood? The family is woods.
That's such a good question.
The street, the street's generally known as Wood Street, and I think it's on the map as Wood Street.
That's really true. I believe that in the case of Wood Street, it was difficult to say Woods Street with 2 S's, kind of back to back like that. But as far as Hazelwoods, I think that we were just a little bit lazy and didn't want to keep saying that S. So it just dropped off after a while. Hazelwoods became Hazelwood, because we just got tired of saying the S, I think.
We don't have a date when they started.
I do not have a date. I've been looking for that, but everything I found, it just basically says, after a while, people got tired of saying the S on the end, and Hazelwoods became Hazelwood. It's like, yes, sir.
Okay, I really want to emphasize that the Hungarian chapter of the Hazelwood history is vitally important.
Yes.
And I think there had to be at least a 20, 30-year span there where, most of the Hungarian population, or a significant part of the Hungarian population in western Pennsylvania, was in Hazelwood. There was also a large Hungarian population in McKeesport.
Wow.
And it's reflective from the church, so you have a Roman Catholic, a huge Roman Catholic parish there. Saint Stephen is the patron saint of Hungary. Saint Stephen.
Little history lesson there.
Yeah. He brought Roman Catholicism to Hungary, like in a year, like the 1000. Yeah. Okay.
That's
yeah.
Yeah, there were 3
And the Magyars tribe was not Roman Catholic. He brought Catholicism to Hungary, and then there's in McKeesport there was a Hungarian parish, St. Stephen's, And then you got that Hungarian Lutheran Church, you have a Hungarian Reformed Church.
Right.
So just the fact that you had those at least 3 Hungarian parishes there tells you how many Hungarian, I mean, there had to be thousands there, plus you had the Hungarian Social Club that just,
Oh, boy.
that just closed. And I know Alex Budnar is probably, that was a terrible thing.
There was so much pride, in ethnic. Hazelwood was actually known as the melting pot of the city of Pittsburgh at one time. Up until the 70s even. I mean, I still saw
I would say the
that.
Hungarians were the most prominent.
Yes, they
of all.
were.
And I would say just like South Oakland and Bloomfield for the Italians, and like Polish Hill for the Polish,
I love
Hazelwood
that.
was,
And I don't want that to die,
Oh, okay.
That's a big part of, my efforts as well.
yeah, I think you should really maybe look at that a little bit harder because I don't know myself the heyday. It was
I'm
probably
really
from
glad
the
you
turn
said
of the
that.
century to like maybe through the 20s. Yeah. Okay, good.
There's a member of the society who actually is going to be a board member who is Hungarian, and his grandparents lived in Hazelwood, so that's how he found out about what I was doing, and wanted to definitely honor Hungarian culture, and that's what I'm all about as well. The Greater Hazelwood Historical Society of Pittsburgh and Cultural Center is our full name. So once we get the space in the old library, we're going to have all kinds of artifacts and cultural things, so that people can come by
I
and
think it
see
would be
what's
very
going on.
impactful because the Hungarians sort of spread out, but it would be very impactful.
Yeah, and I never knew
that,
what happened.
Yeah.
I never knew why it died down or why it dwindled down. But I know that
I know there was a heyday of the 2 or 3 decades where.
I'm going to look into that more. I mean, when I was even looking into the logo for the society, I was using Hungarian colors in the background, because I know that it's really important. And having those 3 Hungarian churches, I believe, I don't know about McKeesport, but it had been written that Hazel was one of the only places in all of the country that would have had 3 Hungarian churches. So that definitely meant a lot.
After the Hungarian Revolution in '56,
Yes.
the Hungarians migrated to this country. Cleveland got the highest amount, and Pittsburgh was the second group that came, the second largest group settled in Pittsburgh.
No, but that wasn't until 1956.
Right. I said,
This was after the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell, which was
17.
after World War I.
Yes.
And so that's when a lot of them came. And even in McKeesport, a lot of Jewish people from the Austro-Hungarian
Wow.
Yes.
came there as well.
Yes.
So and the churches were from that period, I believe, because they also were able to find work here.
The oldest Hungarian church, which is the one that's still in use in Hazelwood, the Hungarian Reformed Church, it actually dates to 1903, the building, but the congregation dates to 1890, and they started in Soho, South Oakland.
Well, there was
They were here way before then even.
a recruiting of for steel workers.
Right,
Yeah,
and they
in
learned
Hungary,
English
like
in the
1890,
churches
yeah,
and things like
yeah.
that,
So they would they'd send agents out to Hungary, and
Yeah,
some
and
of
like
these folks
one
were-
family come and then they send
and
for
then
the
come into
rest. And-
Pittsburgh or McKeesport, because there was a huge pipe mill in McKeesport, so, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
love that. I love that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
As a kid, Andy Warhol worshipped in those churches with his family.
Love Andy. Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. The Run is a neighborhood that I didn't get a chance to mention much about, but I actually do research in the Run as well. All the way to Soho, all the way to Lincoln Place. 15207 zip code encompasses a lot of those other neighborhoods, but I'm also in Greenfield. Like anywhere that has any connection. Squirrel Hill, of course. Even though we have the little bit of Hazelwood Avenue that's after Beachwood Boulevard, we just have a little, little bit of connections. I did learn that the whole area was called Squirrel Hill, including Hazelwood Hill at one time. I believe Helen and I talked about that, which was very fascinating. So we are also connected historically. But I'm sorry, what was your question again?
Andy Warhol.
Oh, that's what it was. So his church was down in the Run. There is a building called the Celebrity Lounge on 2nd Avenue, which is all covered up with graffiti. It was a really cool looking building at one time, but it was a bar, and his family was supposed to have visited there. He was supposed to have written on the, drawn on the walls there, colored on the walls or something. So he is connected to Hazelwood. There was actually, when he was in Shinley High School, he did sketches of Pittsburgh, and he had 3 Hazelwood locations. One is that famous picture of someone walking down the steps to the steel mill, which is actually an African-American lady. I just figured that out because it was a African-American church that was right up the hill, and they were walking down the steps from there. But for him to even, like want to draw Hazelwood, he must have been there, so that was something that, there's actually an author working on a book in Massachusetts that contacted me with this Andy Warhol stuff and sketches and things that I never saw before. And he was telling me about the Hazelwood connection, trying to have me research things about it. I haven't, really verified if he had drawn in this Celebrity Lounge. It's very highly debated in Hazelwood. People are like, oh no, that's not him. That's some wallpaper that he just colored in. But I don't know. I mean, it sounds like it could be true. And I know that he had a love for Hazelwood because he did those sketches when he was in high school. So I love that. I'm looking into, I want him to be a part of Hazelwood history. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. 2 things I wanted to mention. One was, there's sort of an interesting thing. They have I think they've had for 5 years now, something called the Fourth River Music Festival. And it's almost like it's not as big as Woodstock, but it's like, it's a mini music, it's mostly bluegrass and folk music. And it's sort of accessible. It's a street called Nansen, which is kind of not really, it's no longer accessible by cars, partly because there's a landslide. But and that's been going on. There's also a number of people, I think it's the Lenape Sioux, some people have actually traced there are people, residents of Hazelwood, who can trace their ancestry back to, like, I guess the 1700s, and they still have the land and their houses. I mean, the houses have been built since then. But they've been researching that, so they actually hold, the Three Rivers Indians Council they still hold ceremonies and things like that.
Oh, I've been in touch with them.
Yeah,
There's
kind of interesting. Yeah.
There's a Dee Dee.
Dee Dee Schreiner.
Yeah, and I've talked with her before, and her ancestry dates back to these mound builders. So that's a whole nother thing. I love that.
I've sort of been discovering these for the past 2 years, sort of investigating it. I live in Squirrel Hill right now.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk more about that.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. One, Scottish Bottom, I would think would have been named because it's lowland. Okay.
It actually was.
And the other is, could you describe the accident that killed the children and injured others?
Oh my gosh, yes. A 1948 Studebaker, which was won by the driver. And this was in 1954, so it was about 6 years old. But he lost his brakes right at the top of Hazelwood Avenue. And he was honking his horn, and he was screaming out the window, and he was doing everything to try to alert people, to get out of the way. And he went around a bend that's right there by Gladstone School, where the crossing guards were out. And this would have been right as school was letting on in the afternoon around almost 3 o'clock or something like that. And the car was coming down. It was yelling and honking, and it was trying to swerve and trying to run into anything besides a pedestrian or anything. But it made it to the bottom of the hill where John was the patrol captain. So I mean, his job, in his mind, he was like, I'm going to save these kids, I'm going to dive in front of them, push them out of the way, and that's what he did. And the car just, smashed into them. Actually there's a picture of how the car looked after the accident, and it was just basically unrecognizable, it was just completely smashed up. So you can just imagine, them actually being hurled across the street from the car and killed, instantly, the John and Ella, and how any of the other kids survived, really was because of John's efforts. So he's just known as a boy hero. I mean, he actually, I had a picture too, I'm so sorry, of his family receiving a Medal of Honor from then Vice President Richard Nixon. So that would have been in the mid-50s.
Sixth.
Well, no, he was, well, maybe it was, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure when he was Vice President.
Vice President in the 50s.
Under Eisenhower, that's correct. Oh, you guys are so good. So yes, he was Vice President then. He was really young and nice looking in the picture. Forgot about that. He had the school named after him. He actually has a school named after him in his hometown in Italy as well, which I just found out. So we intend to do a lot to honor, them as well. I mean, members of my society always say that Ella Cornelius, who was the young black girl who was killed, deserves to have some sort of, memory as well. So I'm also working to, I actually visited her grave. She's in the Versailles McKeesport Cemetery. So I visited her grave as well. Not sure why she's there, but it's just something that, it happened, 65 years ago, and people are still, fascinated by it, want to honor his memory, and, I talk about him all the time, so, yes, ma'am.
A few years ago, I went to a meeting, and I learned that the Minadeo students were somehow in touch with the Italian students in the village that the Minadeo family came from. And so there's quite a tie between the two schools in the village in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that is so, I believe that school is called Giovanni Minadeo, because that would be Giovanni. But, yes, I can't wait to go to Minadeo and meet with the principal who reached out to me and see what else we can do to, something else we can do. I mean, if there's something that we should be doing, like a day or a parade, something, I don't know, but.
And there was, this boy was an example of a really hard working immigrant, first generation, who was really, going for the sky.
Yes, he was.
Such an exemplary individual.
Yes. He worked at the California Fruit Market, which was steps from where he died. So, he was hardworking. His family had just immigrated, right before that. So, it was a long and hard road after that. But I could remember, seeing his funeral services in the newspaper, thousands of people there. He really was a hero, he really, but, even years later, we still don't want to forget about him, so.
I have three things. On this topic, I read about this time last year in the newspaper that they had raised funds to install a memorial to include Ella at Minadeo School. And it was supposed to be erected in time for the opening of this school year. I never saw or heard anything more about it. But I did read that they had raised the funds. So when you talk to the principal, maybe you can find out.
I certainly will.
The other two, do you have any idea where the Warhol sketches are?
The sketches that I'm referring to, this guy who's writing a book on Andy Warhol in those sketches owns them. And he purchased them on eBay or something like that and didn't know they were Andy Warhol. They say Andy's sketch class of Shinley High School 1946 or something like that. So he didn't know much about Pittsburgh or shit, so he had contacted me and wanted to find out, what I knew. And, we've been going back and forth trying to, but whenever his book comes out, certainly let you guys know. I know. He's lucky to find
Too
those.
bad you didn't find them first.
I know.
Then my question is, John Woods, was he part of that Native American treaty process, you know, before he got the land and started the first settlement?
It says that he was, you know, himself, him and his father actually laying out the city. So when it came to Hazelwood, that was outside of the city, you know, about 5 miles or so. So there were Native Americans, you know, actually still living there as far as what I read. So, you know, this treaty that was done, I mean, it actually was like in New York and, you know, all of the areas that had Indians in the Northeast. So it wasn't just Pittsburgh, but he was supposed to have had dealings himself with the Native Americans and laying out, you know, the land here. So I really don't know for sure.
It was the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, 1768. Yeah, okay, and it was like, the land stretched out all the way to the south of the Allegheny and the Ohio River. So that land right there would have been like the western edge of what settlers would have been able to purchase legally at that point, 1768. And there was David McKee, same time. David McKee purchased land right around 1768, 1769. So there's a parallel there with that Woods. Yeah. So.
And I mean, you know, in my head, I can see John Woods himself actually going up to the Native American and shaking a hand and giving him $10,000. I mean, I'm sure that was.
He might have been scoping out, he might have been scoping out that land, but you know, until you know it was legal by that treaty.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
He
is
couldn't
pretty
actually purchase. Yeah. Because David McKee did the same thing. He was there like 3 years earlier, and that's the confluence of the Monongahela and Youghiogheny River. So he had his eye on that, and then when it was legal, and
wow.
Yeah, 1768.
I love that stuff.
Excellent talk and very commendable research. I have a real quick question. Hazel Woods, when it had the S, was it still one word?
It was actually 2 words.
It was 2 words.
So fascinating. I was saying it that way to try to make it sound like 2 words. Right. Hazel Woods.
Okay.
Yeah, the Hazel Hill Estate, which was the biggest house at one time, it actually named the community, you know, because the Hazel Hill Estate, they just referred to the area at one time as Hazel Hill, and then Wood, they started saying, let's forget about Hazel Hill, let's say Hazel Woods to give, you know, honor to them, and then somebody said, let's drop that S off anyway. Yes, sir.
Andy Warhol, his real name was Warhol.
Warhol. Yes, sir.
I understand he's actually born in McKeesport. Yeah, then he moved to Oakland. His brother owned a North Side sandwich, which years in the North Side. His nephew still owns that sandwich yard out there. So if you really want to know about him, I would go out there. Because I think a little that thing about that, it's a little doesn't jive.
It sure is. And I like to know the truth.
Yeah, I would go out to that north, you know, because they still have some relatives out there, and you might get some good information from them.
Yes. You know what? That's a good question. His name was George King. He was not charged. It was viewed as an accident. The brakes had failed, you know, and he made every effort, you know, to try. He had minimal injuries, and he lived. And he vowed that he would never drive again. And I talked with someone that knew him, and they said that he never drove after that.
What was the name of the synagogue?
It was called Ahavez Zedek, meaning lovers of righteousness. Forgot to say that. Thank you for asking me that.
Okay, I think we're good. Everyone's free to hang around for a little bit. If you have additional questions, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them for you. So, as most people know, we carry our chairs to the rack over there.